Great. Well, thank you so much for having me here this afternoon. I really appreciate being able to chat with you. Yeah, my name's Laura Van Riper. I work for the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, and I'm going to talk about how we've been using EDDMapS as our one-stop shop for all invasive organisms in Minnesota. So as you might have seen in Chuck's beginning presentation, a lot of reports in EDDMapS are plants. And I want to highlight some of the other things that we're using it for. So things like insects, earthworms, pathogens, aquatic plants, aquatic animals, and then of course terrestrial plants are of big importance to us as well. So we have a lot of different users in the state, both people putting data in and using the data. State agencies, our Department of Agriculture, Department of Natural Resources, and Department of Transportation have all committed to sharing data into EDDMapS, and so our data is widely available. We have a lot of local partners, so groups like cooperative weed management areas. We have counties that have aquatic invasive species programs, county agricultural inspectors, lots of great county data. We have Conservation Corps, which is hired to do a lot of work in the state, as well as independent contractors. So all different local partners putting information in. Our University of Minnesota has led a number of participatory science projects. I'll talk about those a little bit more in the talk as well. Things like Starry Trek, where people are out on accesses, reporting at water accesses, reporting invasive species they're observing, and some extension projects I'll talk about too. We get EDDMapS reports in from the general public. People who are interested and put reports in. And then of course, we also work with researchers. So how is the data used? We found it really helpful to have this data all in one spot to help inform things like policies and regulations. It's really important to understand, what species are here, what species are nearby, how widespread are they. All that kind of information informs policies and regulations. It's also really helpful for prevention efforts to know where things are and how to focus those prevention efforts around them. In terms of actually developing management plans, having that data all in one place is really helpful. You can see, how the species are across land ownership boundaries. So for example, we have one high priority site that's part Department of Transportation land and part Department of Natural Resources land, and the plants go right across it. So it's great to have, all of that data in one spot. We've also found it's really helpful for continuity of data. So if someone has reports just on their work computer and they change positions or retire, sometimes that data can get lost. But if we get all that data into EDDMapS, we've got that continuity over time. We've also found it helpful for tracking management efforts. I'll show an example of that with the non-native Phragmites project, where there's really a statewide effort to do management, and you can mark reports as managed and start seeing some of that progress you're making on management. Also have been helpful for information on cold hardiness and distribution. So Minnesota, we are known for being cold, right? So the question will often come up, well, do you think this species is going to be able to survive in Minnesota? And sometimes we can just pull up EDDMapS reports and see spots where it's clearly survived for multiple years and is spreading. And that's really helpful for us to know. It's also helpful to have information on how species are moving and spreading over time. One question I get is about ways that we can use the data and share the data. So for example, our DNR land managers might want to manipulate the data within their GIS where they've got their own additional layers they can put onto it. So we regularly download all the EDDMapS data into GIS files. We make them available to staff through our internal system, and then it's also available to the public. In Minnesota, we have something called the Minnesota Geospatial Commons, where we make data available. And so if you go there, search for invasives, you'll see the terrestrial invasive species observations, the aquatic invasive species observations, layers that people can download. That data all comes from EDDMapS. You can also use this data for custom maps. We saw a nice presentation on that. The photo on the right there is a screenshot of the Minnesota Department of Agriculture pulling in EDDMapS data, putting it into an online map, in this case highlighting the high priority prohibited eradicate noxious weeds in the state and where they're found. So having that map with all those species on there right in one place for people to view that. So let's get into some of those species examples. So here we've got the brown marmorated stink bug. Insects are regulated under our Department of Agriculture. So they've found EDDMapS helpful for tracking brown marmorated stink bug. If you look at the map, that big cluster of reports is the St. Paul, Minneapolis metro area. And it's been helpful for them to see how brown marmorated stink bug is spreading outside of those urban areas to the more rural areas. It's been helpful data for orchards to know how nearby brown marmorated stink bugs are. They've also used the data for assessing potential biological control research sites. And similarly to the noxious weed program, they also do some pulling of the data to manipulate to maps that they have embedded on their website. Emerald ash borer is another big invasive insect issue. Using EDDMapS has helped with some new county records. They also feed this into one of their own maps that they have online. And they found the data helpful for determining generally infested areas, which feeds into regulations around which counties allowed movement, and have been really helpful for helping understand where to focus their survey and outreach efforts. The next taxa group are earthworms. So Minnesota, we were covered by giant glaciers thousands of years ago. So we have no native earthworms. All of our earthworms are non-native. And there's been a lot of research on the impacts of earthworms in Minnesota's forests and the negative impacts that they have had there. A newer species to our region are jumping worms, Amenthus species, and we've been trying to better understand their distribution in the state. So one kind of neat example here, the top map shows what we knew about jumping worm distribution on August 27th, 2020. We kind of knew that the Twin Cities metro area and some of southeast Minnesota had confirmed jumping worms. We had about 30 reports in the Twin Cities area. We did a big press release on August 31st. It got widely picked up. We got a lot of coverage and people got reports into me at the DNR, and I helped get those reports into EDDMapS. So we can see that afterwards we have a better understanding of where jumping worms have been found in the state. And we've got about 111 reports now in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. So it's neat to be able to see the results of our outreach effort. And then when people ask us where they've been found, it's very easy to share that data out. This is where I make a little plug. So I have not been able to figure out a one-stop shop where everybody's putting their worm data into. It's hard to find national level maps of worm distribution. So if you have an earthworm data set, I really encourage you to share that data with EDDMapS so we can get more accurate maps. Jumping worms have a more widespread distribution than what you see there, but those are some of the states that are more actively sharing data about jumping worms into EDDMapS. So I encourage you, if you work with worms, I'd love to see more data in EDDMapS. That'd be great. To switch up to pathogens, here's a oak wilt picture there. For forest pathogens, oak wilt is probably the most common one that gets reported in. And it's not that common to see reports come in for pathogens, but it is an option. And I just wanted to highlight here, if you haven't looked at the EDDMapS website of the different reporting forms for the various taxa groups, they do vary. So if you look at the pathogen reporting form, you can see that there's some things that they ask for those that they don't ask for others. So you can say what the host species is that you're seeing. You can put information in on the type of damage to plants or the damage severity. So it's pretty neat that there's that customization around the type of organism that's getting reported. For our Department of Agriculture, they're following agricultural pathogens, and they've highlighted that there is this IPM PIPE site, Integrated Pest Management Pest Information Platform for Extension and Education, and EDDMapS data feeds into that. And so they have found that helpful. So this is another example of a site that's taking EDDMapS data and then packaging it as is needed for its audience. So it shows things like historical maps of distribution, how things like tar spotted corn have changed over time. And then that information can help state workers decide where to focus their survey efforts. For aquatic invasive species, again, all-taxa here. So from aquatic plants, fish, we've got some goldfish pictures there, zebra mussels, spiny water fleas, all aquatic taxa can be reported into EDDMapS as well. Highlighted the European water clover photo there, because that one was one that was just recently confirmed in a natural area in the state, and now has an EDDMapS report for it. Here's that Phragmites project that I mentioned. So there is a statewide project focused on non-native Phragmites management, and it's working with partners throughout the state. And it's really helpful. All the reports of Phragmites can get into EDDMapS, and then as revisits are done and those sites are treated, you can mark them as treated. And so then on the map, you start seeing, hopefully over time, you'll see more of the yellow and less of the red, and can really start giving that story, about work that's being done on a statewide level to manage non-native Phragmites. So it's really helpful to have that image to go with that. One other thing that Minnesota is known for is the land of 10,000 lakes. And people would like to know, which lakes have invasive species in them. If you go to the Minnesota Tools or the EDDMapS Tools website page, there's a Minnesota Tools section, and we have an infested waters list of lakes and rivers that have key aquatic invasive species. And so sometimes people want to know what invasive species are in my favorite lake or the lake I'm planning to go to. They can easily search that in the list, or if they want to look at more of a map view, that's an option too. So they click on it, they see this map. And then if you click on one of those, so in the little inset photo, I had clicked on Lake Mille Lacs, and then it shows you the invasive species found in that lake. All right, and then just to wrap up, the next thing is participatory science. We have had a number of participatory science projects that have fed data into EDDMapS. So this is University of Minnesota Extension, their terrestrial invasive species projects they've got coming up for 2023. One is going to focus on looking for spotted lanternfly. So we have not found spotted lanternfly in Minnesota, but we have EDDMapS report of various host plant species. So we can use those EDDMapS reports to help direct volunteers for places where they could go and look for spotted lanternfly. Mock strawberry is another project of a species we don't really understand its distribution in the state very well. So we can ask volunteers to use EDDMapS to make mock strawberry reports, put those pictures in. And then finally, some of you might be familiar with this regional level project to map garlic mustard aphids. So these tiny little blue aphids that have been found on garlic mustard. So we can have people put those reports in. And one nice thing for me is that there's a national level verifier for those. So people in Minnesota can put the reports in, and an expert in another state can see the reports and verify them. So that's really helpful. Yeah, and then just to wrap up, just wanted to show some nice examples of ways that EDDMapS can be used for other species beyond plants, and that how it can be beneficial when multiple organizations are feeding data into one central location and easily able to access that data and use it for better decision making. And with that, I thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Laura. That was fantastic. I don't see any questions yet, but if anybody has questions for Laura, feel free to throw those in the Q&A. If not, I think we can keep